This is International Master Eric Kislik. Today we're going to discuss Game 4 of the Ding-Liren Gukesh match. A lot of people were curious what Ding was going to do with white this game, and of course we didn't have to wait very long to find out that he did something new. He played knight f3, and I was kind of predicting that he was going to go back to d4, and I think that's what we're going to see in his three white games to start the match. I think we'll see. First he started with e4, then he went to knight f3, and then he played d4. And a lot of people talked about his opening preparation as lackluster or subpar, but I will talk about why I think his idea in this game was justified and why I did like some aspects of it. And there were even grandmasters who had questions about some of Gukesh's play and claimed an advantage when he actually didn't have one, so let's get into it. So d5, standard move, e3. One very interesting thing I didn't see anyone point out is that this is the first time this has been played in a World Championship game. You might go, well, how'd you figure that out? Did you go through every single game? Well, I have a World Championship game database. And I just searched it, and this position had never been played before. So that's actually pretty interesting that this had not been played. Black really could not have expected this to show up on the board. So, again, I talked about in the last video how you have these three main types of advantages you want to go for. Either familiarity, time, or objective advantage. And because getting an objective, 0.5 advantage, half pawn advantage is so rare in this kind of a match, you might say, well, if I can be more familiar and have a lead on the clock, that would be great. So at least he played something his opponent was pretty much, definitely not expecting. That's basically what Gukesh said in the press conference afterwards. So knight f6, and now b3 was played. And here he plays bishop to f5, which was an interesting standard choice. A lot of the time people do this. For example, let's say someone plays any number of systems that are considered maybe not the most aggressive, like the Nimzo-Larsen, for example, with b3. A lot of the time people will play stuff like d5, bishop g5, like a reverse Trompowsky, d5, bishop f5, reverse London. So I said black plays a reverse London system setup. And, one thing he might have been trying to avoid is just very conventional, typical play. Let's say e6, bishop to b2, bishop to d6, c4, castle, knight c3. Because I do have to point out one thing. Even though this was a rare choice by Ding-Liren, he does also have to be careful that he doesn't slip into something he's unfamiliar with. I actually played a 2600 Grandmaster who played the Nimzo-Larsen. Actually, he played knight f3, b3 against me, exactly like in this game, except with e3 played first. And he managed to just get me into something similar to the line that I'm going to show you. Not exactly, but very close. And he just played the position better than I did. And you also have to be careful you put all the pieces on the right squares. Now, would this have been bad for black? No, I don't think it would have been that bad. But I still think that Gukesh was just going for a more defined setup. So, for example, I said after bishop to e2, this was apparently what Gukesh may have been trying to avoid. Now, you look at this position. Yes, they have this IQP here, and I know a lot of people like to try to avoid all types of IQPs. Now, playing an IQP with black, in principle, does make sense in a lot of openings. For example, let's say you say, well, I'm going to take on an IQP, but I'm going to try to simplify the position quickly. For example, black might play knight takes, queen takes, rook e8, bishop f5 to challenge the queen, in some cases even d4. And in that case, there is a good chance that a lot of the perceived advantage white may have here against the IQP will fizzle out. So anyway, he chose bishop f5, bishop to e2, and now h6. Basically avoiding e6, knight h4. Once again, I did see commentary on this, and probably it's so obvious to the IMs and GMs watching this that, e6, knight h4 is a concern. So he plays h6 to secure the bishop, that people didn't even really comment on it. But yeah, that is the point. So that later you can just play e6, and then the bishop can drop back. There's going to be no threat to that bishop anymore. All right, so bishop to a3. And now, once again, there was a lot of criticism of the way that Ding played here, but there are only 9 games in the master database here, and he plays a reverse Queen's Indian with bishop to a6. So that's what Ding said in the press conference, that he wanted to play this reverse Queen's Indian, and I totally get it. Because if you think about it, the reverse Queen's Indian with bishop a6, or sorry, the regular Queen's Indian with bishop a6 is considered perfectly fine for black. So how about we play it with an extra tempo? Now I will explain something on the next move. Knight bd7, good move. You know, effectively eyeing e6, take. I can take with the knight, then I can go knight g6, or I can just go right back like he did in the game. Okay, so Ding castles. I said a benefit to playing reverse systems with white is that they can have a slight disorienting effect. Plus, sometimes the optimal plan under normal circumstances is just not as good a tempo down. This helps explain the logic of Ding's decision a little bit better. Yeah, I feel like that was kind of underestimated because, again, if someone just looks at the computer and goes, oh, white only has 0.1 or no real edge here, but the opponent's not expecting it, and there are certain cases where the opponent just plays in a kind of cliche way and it does end up a little bit worse and maybe behind on the clock. So e6 was played. That was a good move. That was a good move. Now, playing in the conventional Queen's Indian fashion would be something like g6, bishop g7, or earlier g6 and bishop g7. But, you know, that I think that actually leads to a little bit of a suboptimal position. So he plays e6 as a good move. Bishop takes f8, knight takes f8, c4. Now, once again, some criticism of Gukesh's play here. I just think he chose a really, really solid setup. And I would also reject the idea that white's c takes d5 idea, going for this kind of QGD exchange line, led to much. Because, simply put, if you trade off the dark squared bishops in a typical QGD exchange, kind of like he had in the last game, yeah, there's not going to be that much of an advantage under normal circumstances. So people were saying, I mean, I even saw strong grandmasters say, why doesn't he just go c6 here? Well, I do have a little bit of an argument for why c6 can be criticized. I said he avoided c6 because then he can go for c5 in one tempo. That's one of the reasons he may want to go for c5 in one move and not have to waste time on this. But so let's say I play this. Knight c3, queen c1, take, knight d4, and now I have this idea, and notice how so much of this is just aimed against the fact that, well, they didn't go for a c5 line, so now I could maybe go queen c1, knight a4, and have ideas of knight c5. So I continued the line, knight c5 here, knight f5. Now, objectively, I don't have a huge advantage or anything here, but it is a little bit awkward for black to find plans. So I said h5, queen d1, hitting the pawn, bishop d7, hitting that knight, takes, bishop d3, I hold on to the knight, knight e7, knight h4. I'm just going to try to keep my space edge. You know, I can play this, and then I can play b4. And you know, this is arguably the best version that you could get of any of the QGD exchange types of positions. So in some cases, the knight comes to e5, and in other cases, I can get in a quick, you know, b5 minority attack and potentially leave them with a backward pawn on the c file. So I think you can see, based on the game continuation, that the knight bd7 line was very principled and actually perfectly good and sound, and not worse than anything else. So I think the criticism of c6 was not, or of knight bd7, knight 8d7 instead of c6 was unjustified. So knight c3 was played. I will propose another plan here. d4, which I give an exclamation mark to, castles, queen c1, and there's that c5 move I was talking about. Knight c3, take. So if you think about it from a general strategy standpoint, basically what black would like to do here is really just trade off some pawns, trade off some minor pieces, make the position quite safe and sterile, and it's very hard to claim an edge. Now, I think that the best that white could have done here is go for this and go for a4, a5. So a4, a5, and I said this looks like the main idea Ding was aiming for. Essentially what I mean is aiming for from his opening preparation. Now, you can also make an argument for, well, maybe black just goes rook b8 and b6 and has a rock-solid position. Yeah, there's definitely a good argument for that. But, I mean, white still does have a little bit of extra space here. So, at least based on what he was going for, that does seem like the best option. Okay, so knight c3, castles, and I once again highlighted the d4 move. Ding also pointed out in the press conference that this is the most typical move, and he wanted to avoid that. I mean, I get it, but one argument you could make here is, okay, I go queen c1, I go rook d1, I go queen b2. And, then if I do stuff like rook a c1, knight e1, bishop d3, I do still ask black to resolve the central structure and figure out, is he going to play a pawn break? What's he going to do here? So, for example, here, I go queen b2, I go rook a c1. Now, you can certainly make an argument black has no real weaknesses here, but white has also achieved something himself. So I continued the line with a couple interesting moves. Let's say g5, knight e1, and then I want to go bishop d3. And I'm still asking black, okay, well, how are you going to concretely equalize? Because maybe if I can play well over the next couple of moves, maybe I could claim a very small plus here. Maybe I could claim a small advantage. Okay, so he goes c takes d5, e takes d5, b4. Yeah, kind of anticipating going b5 so that when c6 is played, he can take and then play against the c pawn. c6 was a good move, and now he plays knight to d4. I thought this was an interesting choice as well. Queen b3, and then you can go queen b2. Another idea is you could try to play for a4 very quickly, like he did in the game. h3, take. I mean, this was as interesting as anything else. Black can play b6. Black is doing okay here. I still think that may have been a more interesting choice than what he played in the game. Knight d4, the bishop simply drops back. Queen to b3. And he went knight e5. I did think it was interesting what Ding and Gukesh said about this move in the press conference. So this was the only round where I stayed around and I followed the entire press conference. Basically, Ding said he was surprised by the move. Gukesh thought it was a natural move. And one of the things that Gukesh said is that there are a lot of lines where f4 might be played. And he said, well, I can just play knight g6, knight e7, and then you can't really play d4 without creating a backward pawn for yourself. So the other point behind knight e5 is that, well, now you just have ideas like rook c8 and then just challenge the strong centralized piece on d4. So it's basically an argument that, all right, I'm going to put a strong centralized piece right in the middle of the board, and I'm going to challenge yours. So exactly like my chapter, Fighting Against Centralized Pieces in Chess Logic and Practice, my second book. So he establishes a centralized piece, and he says, I'm going to challenge yours. So the other way to play, of course, you could just simply play knight e4. Say I go here, queen f6, hitting f2, take, rook ac1, rook fd8, a4. Yeah, I mean, this looks like pretty sound and sensible play for white. Maybe there was something about this type of play as well that Gukesh didn't like so much. I'll just play h3 on the next move. And yeah, pretty sound, reasonable position for both sides. But he liked knight e5 more. It was an interesting choice. All right, so now Ding goes a4, rook c8, playing exactly according to what Gukesh wanted to do. Basically, I always have this idea like b6, c5. Really interesting concrete plan because it also speaks to what you might want to do generally in this structure as a whole, as black. Well, I'm just going roll. Okay, c5 break, d4 break, get this good pawn play going, and maybe black can fight for the initiative there. Other idea is, let's say I play rook fd1 instead of a5 played in the game. Say I go f4, and then maybe knight d3. I do have the discovery, knight cb5, but then there's also this move, take, and then queen d6. And both sides have isolated pawns here, isolated d pawns. So probably white can't really claim anything objectively there. All right, so a5, and certainly one thing I was interested in this game is when did somebody have an opportunity to get an advantage? So that's also why I listened to the press conference and wanted to hear what the players were saying. And I really think that the best chances were the ones that I highlighted, like going d4 and queen c1. And arguably white, let's just say white is for choice in those lines, but maybe not objectively better in those types of lines like I was showing. For example, like this one where they might go rook a, b8, and b6. This one where you're trying to trade off the bishop, because what he ends up getting in the game did look quite comfortable for black. But interestingly, nobody really went into that analysis that I saw on this d4, queen c1 stuff. But I did have multiple grandmasters play queen c1 against me, so it stands out to me maybe more than it might to other players. So knight e4 is again a typical move, just trying to trade off pieces here, also establish the centralized piece. Let's say I go here, and this could lead to a repetition. Bishop f1, bishop e2, that could lead to a repetition there with the active piece play for black. b6, just playing Gukesh's plan. Now, there was certainly a lot of discussion over this bishop a6 move. Bishop a6 and f4. And one of the ideas is that if knight c4 is played here, let's say knight c4, take, trying to go c5 and going for a bishop d3 move. Now I do have this move, knight cb5. So there are some tactical justifications of it. But the problem here is just like Gukesh said in the press conference, I don't even think it's anything. You can just go knight e7. So if you just go here in knight e7, the problem that you have with the structure here is, well, how are we going to advance this? What exactly are we going to do with the structure? Are we going to go b5? Oh, probably not. Are we going to go, where are we going to go with this? So I said just knight f3, knight e4. Yeah, black looks okay. So, yeah, a lot of criticism of Ding Liren's play here when he played knight f3. Now, here's my defense of what Ding Liren played. People were saying, he played it in too mousy of a way. It was too careful. He didn't play for a big enough edge. Well, I also read a lot of comments, actually, even from the official press release from FIDE, saying that this was a 100% accurate game according to the best chess engines, which seems fair to me. Although I did also, like I say previously, I did say here that there were better moves like d4 on move 9 and move 10. Whereas from Gukesh, I liked all of his play. Bishop f5 seemed very justified. Knight 8 d7 on move 8 I thought was an excellent move. Knight e5, maybe I would have preferred knight e4 for a little bit of clarity and simplicity. But I didn't have any objection to any of these moves. So I thought it was very sensible from both players. Now, somebody might say, well, why did Ding choose to bail out here? Because that's effectively what he did. And I would say, because the opponent found a very good answer to what he plays. I mean, essentially, World Championship match preparation is, like I said, can you get an objective advantage? Okay, in this game he didn't get one. Could he have gotten a familiarity advantage? Slightly, very slightly, but not much to exploit here. Could he have gotten a time advantage? He didn't really succeed in that. But let's say he'd gotten a time advantage of, 45 minutes on the clock. And let's say he'd gotten a familiarity advantage. So the idea of bailing out and just being completely safe when the opponent answers your test, basically solves your test perfectly is actually quite fair. There was discussion of this in Secrets of Practical Chess by John Nunn. He said, essentially, I think I'm covering what he said here very fairly. He said, look, if you're playing white and your opponent has essentially a perfect response to what you played and they perfectly neutralize exactly what you did, it's okay to go back to the drawing board and the next time you play them, like let's say it's a regular player you play at your chess club, it's perfectly okay to go back to the drawing board and the next game you try to prepare something better or slightly different. And it's okay if you don't get anything to bail out if you never risked anything. And I think Gukesh simplified very nicely here. Take d4, kind of similar to what he was looking at previously. Knight e2, take. So just like I said, he's going for piece exchanges and pawn exchanges. And both sides don't really have any weaknesses. He just went for bishop e4. That just leads to more exchanges. Knight e4 also playable. again, maybe there was something about this he didn't like. Maybe he didn't want to play with the bishop against the knight here. For example, maybe something like this, queen e7. I think it's perfectly safe. Looks 100% safe to me. And also, he can go c5, just like in the game, whenever he wants to. All right, so rook fd1, playing against the queen. Queen just goes to a safe square. Yeah, I mean, he probably didn't want to bother playing this pawn structure with the doubled pawns and the isolated h-pawn, although it is no problem. Take back. I try to stop the pawn. Rook a4, rook fd8, rook c1. Yeah, the rook comes in, the hog comes into the 7th rank, but, you know, I thought this would have been an interesting way to play, but objectively, black just has good centralized pieces, so there's no advantage there. So he just went for safety here, and like I said, I don't really think he can be faulted, and I think what John Nunn said in Secrets of Practical Chess, a phenomenal book, I think was very reasonable. And look, if you give your opponent a test and they have all the answers to that test, it's okay to go to the next game and try to tweak what you do. I mean, a lot of World Championship matches have various, back and forths. And I saw somebody else was saying that there were plenty of World Championship matches where a player with white never got anything. I mean, like, take, for example, the World Championship match Kasparov against Kramnik, where Kasparov couldn't win a single game. Now, he had basically one game where he got something with white and couldn't turn it into anything. But that was just one game in a whole match where he got something. So it's very hard. You're happy if you can get anything. And if you don't get much, it's okay, like I said, to go to the drawing board and look for some small improvements. Look for some ways that you can challenge your opponent the next time. I was saying maybe knight f4 is an interesting move. Of course, this is starting to simplify pretty quickly. I can take it the queen here. Go back, queen b3, rook d1. Yeah, super safe. It's super safe. Queen c3, rook c7. Very safe position. So, yeah, black is totally fine there. A takes b6, a takes b6. Yeah, and now there's that strong centralized knight. He just wants to get it out of there. He just says, all right, let's just trade off the knight. I'll leave you with no strong pieces. Strong centralized minor pieces at least. h3, giving himself some luft here. c5, okay, just advancing that pawn, turning it into a pass pawn, take, b takes c5, simply take back, rook c1, queen e5, queen c2. Now, curiously, Gukesh spent a little bit of time here on rook d5. I know some people said that this might have been for gamesmanship reasons, but sometimes people just want to choose the safest, simplest way. So he just played rook d5, g3. Now, the only thing you have to be careful about with white is that you never go for some line where you go queen takes c5 at some moment, like, I don't know, e4, rook d4, queen takes c5, and then rook d1 check and lose the queen. That's about the only thing you don't want to do in this. But g3 played by Ding. And he could play g6 if he wants to. There's really nothing happening here. Yeah, he could play h4 if he wants, king g2. But yeah, there's nothing really happening there. So I think this was very fair by both players. King h7, queen c4, queen d6. Now he just trades off a pawn, e4. Take, queen e4, pinning the rook. He just pins him back, queen d5. Take, king f3. So typical rook and 3 versus rook and 3. King e4. And they simply had a draw here. Yeah. Very fair repetition. But I did think there were a number of interesting things in this game. I mean, notably that this had not been played in any World Championship match games is pretty fascinating. I mean, you might have expected at least one player tried it, but nope. That was not played in any of the games. And it was interesting what both players did. So Gukesh plays a reverse London system, and what Liren does is he plays a reverse Queen's Indian, a bishop a6 Queen's Indian with colors reversed. And, he was asking Gukesh to solve the problems, and Gukesh did an excellent job. And the only thing that I argued here, like I said, I also thought that was a good move. The only thing that I argued here is white maybe maybe could have gotten something like this position where you try to squeeze a little bit. And again, maybe they get a little bit low on time. Maybe get a position like this, like the other suggestion I had on the previous move. Or maybe it's a little bit hard for them to play. But I think this was the best thing to go for because ultimately the minority attack he went for here, it didn't give him much. But it was answered, like I said, it was answered extremely well. And there were people who were saying that bishop a6 was better for white according to the computer. I would just say that's a low-depth conclusion. It really isn't. So, I mean, if you analyze this deeply enough, it's equal. It's 100% equal. So the fact that he didn't play f4 was not a problem. He just did this, and then it simplified, and black was able to bail out. So I just think you can't really criticize somebody too much when you have a game where there's 100% accuracy in a world championship match. I mean, that's just really high quality play. So I think both players played a good game. I think that the preparation from Ding did actually have some logic to it. Like I said, one of the unexpected points is that he was going for potential disorientation of the opponent. So I don't think it was as bad as people said. And like John Nunn talked about in Secrets of Practical Chess, you go back to the drawing board and maybe you do find a slight area to kind of jab at the opponent, find out what his opening repertoire is going to be for the match, and maybe you can get some position that the computer considers equal that's just very awkward or unpleasant for the opponent. So that'll be it for this video, but check out Chess Culture on Facebook, and you may see some interesting things there you haven't seen before. All right, guys, I'll catch you in the next one.